a lot of organizations, and irrespectively of the scale, it might be a startup or enterprise, they are trying to resolve some of the human process challenges just by basically purchasing and adopting technology. And then there is another thing when they do it, this technology may lie on the shelf for 12 months and not actually being used for its purpose.
You're listening to KBcast, the cybersecurity podcast for all executives. Cutting through the jargon and hype to understand the landscape where risk and technology meet. Now, here's your host, Carissa Breen.
Eugene, welcome to the show. I'm excited to have you on the show today because, I've known you just recently, like maybe 6 or so months, maybe it's longer, it's hard to tell in COVID times now. But when I met you, you had a very interesting view on the industry, and I think we shared similar views. So I'm really keen to explore that, hear your thoughts, hear your insights. But before we sort of dive on into that, we always like to start our podcast off with talking about you and your journey. So please talk our listeners through where you started to where you are now.
Hi, Carissa. Thanks for having me on that podcast. It's a pleasure, and indeed we know each other for several months, but timing is very relative things these days. So yeah, I'm a business development partner at Fastlane Solutions. I also run my own strategic advisory boutique shop called Infinite. So it all started for me, to be honest, in Eastern Germany. I was a kid of Ukrainian Soviet parents, and I was born there. Then when the whole thing collapsed, we moved back to Ukraine. I started studying international law, did the legal career for 10 years with Baker McKenzie and other foreign law firms, US law firms present in Ukraine. And then from there, at some point of time, when I was already at this stage of career when you manage more of the people and processes and customer expectations, I understood that the world is really moving into this technology space, and it will enable almost every industry except for probably family law, which is hard to manage just by AI or anything else. And yeah, I made a conscious decision to try myself in different industry, and actually to try myself in my life in different place of the world. So it just turned out to be that Australia was that place. And I moved to Melbourne in 2017, did a little bit of upgrade in terms of my business degrees on top of what I knew back then that I was doing in the EU and Ukraine itself. And from there, I joined Fastlane Solutions, and we started doing a lot of interesting things in technology. So that's, in a nutshell, the quick snapshot of how I ended up here and involved in the industry at the moment.
Interesting background. I love it. And I love that you did move to Australia. I have never moved countries in my life yet. So that is obviously a big jump, especially because, you're obviously English isn't your first language. So I'm really keen because of what's happening in recent times. Now, you're obviously Ukrainian, you've got that background, your parents are from there. Maybe you can just touch on sort of a little bit more of your thoughts around what's sort of happening in the world today, and how do you sort of see what's happening in the world today really shifting from a technology and security perspective? How are we going to sort of traverse into this new way of operating?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. Pretty broad though, but in terms of the Ukrainian conflict itself, to be honest, historically it has been a frozen problem since the moment when I was touching upon my point of life where I was born, because Soviet Union collapsed, and the relationship between kind of former Soviet republics and Ukraine was second in terms of influence economically and technology industry wise. Those relationships were still frozen, and it's been almost 32 years since then. And none of the former kind of Soviet republics could have had the power to actually take responsibility over what's happening in the region. Russia tried to, but as far as we see, methods used are not always those which are acceptable. And Ukraine was probably the only one republic which was leaning more towards West, and there was a lot of collaboration economically and in terms of fighting corruption and multinational fraud. And in technology, because we have Ukrainians have a lot of talent in a very niche and high end aspects of technology like blockchain, cybersecurity. There are a lot of famous kind of white hat hackers coming from Ukrainian background. I know heaps of those people based in Australia as well and in the US. And within the recent kind of frame of the conflict, I already some people reached out to me from Melbourne and Sydney and from the US trying to help in the cybersecurity space. And I just kind of forwarded them to the right direction. I have some friends there who are working with government and helping in all this cybersecurity space and national security and technology area of it. So in terms of how do we move from here, I think that the world has lost all the gains after the Second World War in terms of globalization of the economy, freedom of movement of capital, information, people, workforce. And it actually started not obviously because of the war in Ukraine. It actually started, from my perspective, during COVID, because the world just started to fragment into some alliances and local groups of interest between countries or corporations, which creates, when you're kind of in this isolated, segregated mode, you build more walls and you build more offensive and defensive things around it, and it definitely will influence the entire cybersecurity and technology space. So I'm actually expecting a larger proliferation of defensive and offensive cybersecurity aspects, obviously in the private and public sector.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've spoken to a few people recently, like the last week, and they said that they've got Ukrainian developers and they've had to sort of, put a lot of their product development on hold. And so there's definitely a big shift. And I know that they've got a very highly skilled security capability there. I've worked with people in security before who were from the Ukraine. So in terms of your understanding living there, as well as, what is happening, and from your experience now living in Australia, if you sort of fast forward 5 years, do you think that we'll still sort of be not in the same predicament, but do you think that the playing field will equal out and level out, or do you think that perhaps we may even start to go backwards?
Just to clarify, you mean the entire global landscape, or in terms of what's happening there?
I think the entire global landscape, just of course, because you've got a different lens than perhaps someone like myself who's only ever lived in Australia. So I'm really keen, because you have lived in multiple parts of the world. Maybe you have a very different and unique view of if we're going to move forward, if we're going to move backwards, or what.
Honestly, and I recently attended one of the investment conferences in Sydney, and the tendencies where people invest money now, there's a huge uplift of trend of so-called ESG investments, economical, social, and governance and ethical investments, where funding and investors are trying to get rid of fueling aggressive or destructive business models, which will fuel any kind of conflicts or negative things in the world. So yeah, in relation to your question, I would probably say we started moving backwards in the last 3 years, and the war in Europe actually confirms that it hasn't been happening at this scale since the Second World War. So it does tell that humanity, while having advanced significantly in technology and other areas and science, still the ways we operate and the ways we make decisions in business and in governance and politics, they're pulling us backwards, and technology will follow. So it will either become more fierce and aggressive in terms of what it's going to do, or we'll need to rethink the ways we operate. So yeah, my quick answer is we're going backwards at the moment, and I would also expect in the next year or two a financial reboot. Some people who are more kind of oriented to look at things pessimistically, they would call it a financial crisis, but I would expect a financial reboot, proliferation of digital currencies and crypto, and new ways of governing financial systems on a national scale. Hopefully those national scales will start talking to each other pretty soon again, because we really need to get back to this united, even if it's polarity, but it's still united.
Yeah, it's a big topic, and I wanted to sort of just gauge your hypothesis on that, because again, there's a lot of people talking about what they think may happen in sort of not just in the next 12 months, but the next 5 to 10 years. So I'm always curious to hear people's opinions on that. But one thing I'd like to focus on, which you mentioned, like business models. Now, when you and I spoke originally, you sort of talked about that, but you also sort of talked around human process versus tech capability. So can you sort of elaborate a little bit more about what you mean when you say this?
Yeah, so essentially, during my career, whether in legal consulting, business or technology consulting, the main takeaway for me right now is whatever tools we use, whether in legal, it's sort of laws and processes, and procedures, or in technology, those are like technology tools. Always tend as humans, we always tend to go into one or another extreme. One of the extremes is when the organization is not capable of adopting technology changes and being sort of up with time and upgrades that are required. The other extreme is when the organization is not mature in terms of how it manages its human capital and how it manages its processes and relationship within this human capital. But this organization would heavily rely on technology as a gateway to some sort of relief and resolving of its problems and challenges, which is another extreme. And especially during COVID and probably it started before that, and because of the huge push by kind of technology vendors to adopt this or that solution. A lot of organizations, and irrespective of the scale, it might be a startup or enterprise, they are trying to resolve some of the human process challenges just by basically purchasing and adopting technology. And then there is another thing when they do it, this technology may lie on the shelf for 12 months and not actually being used for its purpose. So I'm really a big kind of supporter of having the holistic approach and looking at all things non-technology before going into that space. In whatever decision you make as a manager or leader at each and every level. And then the next thing is when you do any technology adoption decision, it's always the value chain is always starting with human and ending up with human, and whatever happens in between should serve that purpose. And I think we went too far with kind of overwhelming avalanche adoption of technology without thinking about the initial purpose of it. We invented everything just to serve a better, business or personal life for humans. And I think we're starting to forget about the why did we start it in the first place.
In terms of sectors, would you say that there are particular areas that are really, like you said, if it's more focused on the technology or more focused on the human side, is there areas that you've come across that are more focused on one or the other? Like, can you clearly see that there isn't that equilibrium? But then, if so, which are those sectors that are sort of leaning towards more human or more tech?
Well, if you mean sectors of the economy or kind of segments of market, I would definitely say from our experience, and this is what we've been doing with Fastlane solutions as well for some of our clients. Historically, it's financial industry and all industries which are heavily regulated in terms of compliance, and obviously financial industry is there. So they by design of their sort of task in the market, they need to adopt a lot of technology solutions for the purpose of being compliant with regulation, being responsible with their customers. But the downfall and the gap that I'm seeing there, the adoption of all of these solutions, whether in-house or for customers, sometimes gets sort of distracted or dismantled by the org design, org dynamics of the, say, bank or financial institution itself. People who are working within, or vendors who are working with that company, they are not aligned, and it turns out into huge delays, low quality technology adoption, customer dissatisfaction, and high costs and legacy, heavy legacy of technology, and misalignment between the new stuff and the previous stuff. So probably maybe I have a professional bias, but I would definitely tell that this is financial industry, and the example that there are new players coming into that market, whether it's in payments or in banking, and who are trying to solve that assumed challenge. They're trying to be more agile. They're trying to be more human centric about how they build teams and deliver products to their customers, and they're trying to be more reflective about what's happening in the market, and take mistakes and kind of downfalls of the big players into account, and become a better servicing business in that way. So yeah, in a short answer is probably the regulated industry, in particular in focus financial industry from my perspective.
So one of the things that I'm curious to explore now is, you just mentioned like financial services, of course, they do have a big push and they're leveraging a lot of the technology capability. But from your understanding, your experience of observing this sort of behavior, what do you think that these companies potentially in financial services are sort of missing on the human element side? Is there anything that sort of comes to mind?
Yeah, I think they're very much in the game of delivering quicker products to their customers, being compliant, being very tough in terms of all these frameworks and requirements. But what they're doing, they forget about the internal culture, internal org design and dynamics, and the institutional knowledge and people they have internally. It's actually at the core of being successful for their customers and being compliant and responsible for the industry itself. So I think they really need to start looking more inwards, and making sure people who have been there for a while, who are bearers of that institutional knowledge, and who are involved in delivery of whatever services or products, they are they're kind of respected, and they have the right architecture of the organization and the right processes and dynamics to serve to the market. Because in simple language, if half of the, say, big banks sort of tribe or department leaves in a very important area, whatever compliance level you have, whatever upgraded technology is in place, you're not going to deliver to anyone, and you're going to lose a lot of time and cost and effort to get the right people in place again, and get them up to speed, and actually regain that institutional knowledge that you have lost with turnover of your employees, or even vendors who are serving as service partners. So I think they really need to start looking more inwards to be successful for themselves and around. And as I've mentioned, some of the players who are entering the market in doing new ways of working, doing new ways of delivery of products, and being more agile and customer centric in payments or in banking, they're getting more traction, and they're actually cutting off the market share from those slow old-fashioned players.
Yeah, and it makes total sense, right? Like, I really do get it. I mean, technology can do a lot of the heavy lifting then opposed to humans, as well as it removing human error. So I get the reasoning. But would you say because, for example, Fin Services are very focused on the technology, that they sort of miss the point of where they're going with what they're doing? Maybe the vision sort of shifts, and all of a sudden it's just very focused on the technology at the core. Is there a bit of that that's going on? Because again, like it could easily steer you away quite easily, right? And you go down a rabbit hole on just focusing on the tech rather than like, well, why are we doing this tech in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great summary of that, because in essence, as I've started this podcast, with this statement that the whole technology thing was invented by humans to serve humans, and to make other human, to, and to help all of the humans, right? So if you look at the financial services, uh, some of those organizations I'm talking about, they really decided to focus just on how, and they forgot about why and what they're actually doing. Sometimes it's not about the speed of how you deliver products to the market. Unfortunately, they're being pushed by the shareholder interests or the industry standards. But sometimes it's actually, why are you doing that? Maybe it's better to deliver one product rather than three, but align your team with it, align your strategy with it, and your customers lifetime value will be just larger from that point, because you'll take care of of everyone in the chain, in the value chain. So yeah, technology is a tool, and if you're focusing on the tool and you're not looking at what actually you're building, then you'll end up in a situation where you're just worshiping that tool and not actually constructing or architecting new product solution. Or I don't know, I can use the analogy of the tradie. If I'm just worshiping my hammer, but I forget that I'm actually working for my customers, then I'll just remain alone with that hammer at home and happy about it, but I'll end up nowhere.
Oh my God, you're so true. Okay, so I'm really curious about this then. So, how do we check ourselves that we're not worshipping the tool? So, is there any sort of signs, indicators that we're like, ooh, actually, we're sort of getting really absorbed by this? And then by that point, you're so far in it, that's all that you see then. So, what sort of advice can you give to people that are perhaps listening going, is this me?
Well, I'm not gonna, open Americas here. It's just asking yourself the question why all the time, and then if you have a group of people or a larger organization and diverse teams with different skills and backgrounds, you just keep communicating about it, like technology guys, then strategy guys, financial guys, legal. You convene all of them together in one room, and you just ask that question with a certain level of frequency and certain level of kind of repetition, and make sure you don't deviate from that why in business and strategy and delivery. And delivery is all about sort of how you deliver. This is where technology is applied. So and it's a very good exercise for our own lives, but definitely organization and its customers. These are like like nodes in blockchain. These are all interconnected people in the chain, and if they keep speaking the same language of why are we doing that, and then we understand what are we doing, and then we deliver on how, like you apply this or that technology or this or that business framework or financial framework, whatever is that. So just that, why did we start this project or program in the first place? Why are we delivering this product for our customers? Maybe their perceptions have shifted, but we're already deep diving into which kind of cloud solution we're going to apply to that. And nobody cares. I mean, for banks, nobody cares whether they're in this or that cloud. Most of the customers, they take care about the value of the service. So any organization came there to deliver the value to the market, and behind that there is a why, right? And that's it. That's pretty much the whole magic. It's basically being consistent with asking this question why to yourself. And then of course there is a lot of literature and science there, or why is kind of a purpose, but then there is a very important part of the execution, and then there is a lot of quantifiable and verifiable factors which impact execution. And to be honest, a lot of players in the financial industry, for instance, that I'm referring to, they're pretty good in execution, but when the why and the purpose was wrong, you just execute on something that is not required there, and that may harm first your team, secondly your reputation and your customers, and overall your business position in the market.
Okay, so there's a couple of things that came up in my mind as you were speaking. So, first and foremost, are people asking why enough? But before you answer that, I'd also like to explore working in a large corporation myself. When you're like, 50 levels down from the CEO, you start to lose focus on that vision. Or if you're even 6 levels below the CISO, or whatever it is, whatever arbitrary number the levels, you do start to lose that vision of the why. And so, in my experience, I've asked why, and the manager's gone, we just don't ask why, we just do the thing. So, how do you sort of foster the right culture? Because I'm a questioner. I ask why we're doing something. I won't do something unless it actually makes sense. I'm not going to just do it because so and so told me to do it, which is probably why I'm not working for someone else and I'm working for myself. So I'm curious to know, how do we get around that? Because that's a big reason why I chose to leave a lot of organizations, because they didn't have this vision. You start questioning, no one likes it. Like, it's kind of like poking the bear a little bit. So how do we poke the bear without getting people offside?
Well, yeah, really adore the question, Carissa. First of all, I think that the fact that you are not involved with this type of organizations and this was your conscious decision back in the time, this takes courage to do that. Some people they are not, a lot of people, like if you have the room of 100 people and at least 60-70% of them are not courageous enough just to make this step like you've done or some other people, this culture will remain in place. But what happened during the COVID, you probably heard about the so-called hype term global resignation, or huge turnover of employees, mainly in the US, but it will impact everyone. When people actually understood during COVID that some of their fears and anxieties are not that scary, and they can make this step and actually question why I'm doing this job for the last 15 years and I was never explained what exactly I was trying to achieve, whether it's the scale of 20 people in the organization or 10,000. And some of the people they understood there is no why here. I can't deliver on the blind targets and blind strategy, and I can't sit in this blind zone anymore. So I think to your first kind of part of the question, whether everyone's asking this question, why enough? I think in the last 2 years, it has actually ramped up into unprecedented rates, and people are starting to ask why. And the outcome is that if I don't have this meaning and purpose in the organization, it's just about salary and delivering something that we don't know why we're delivering. A lot of people just resign to nowhere and they're getting new jobs because those players that I was referring in the first point, who are more advanced, who are more, in terms of ways of working, in terms of being organization centric, customer centric, they're getting those smart people on board, and they are transparent enough to answer this question every day. Why are we doing that? So I think people actually started to ask that question and more frequently, which is a great trend. And on the other hand, of course, there are still managers who would answer you that we don't ask that question in our kind of dictatorship like organization. You just do what you're told to do. It's your own decision whether you accept that your way or not. But I think from my perspective, in the next, I'm going to be pretty broad here in terms of horizon, but and not to sound dramatic, but in the next 10 to 15 years, this type of managers, they have no future. They just have no future because we're all what technology did to us. We're so connected that we can literally run execution of a lot, of huge amount of decisions per day, which means if there is a trend along the workforce and employees and entrepreneurs that we're not going to accept that answer, it means that the exponential impact of saying no to this type of leadership will kind of move fast, and maybe it's not even 10 15 years, maybe 5 to 7, coming to the first point of the reboot of the entire global economy and the ways of working. um, so yeah, I think COVID actually made a great, made some positive impact in that for all of us to become better leaders and employees or partners or vendors or whatever. I think we're actually doing pretty good. It's just sometimes painful, and there are a lot of biases involved.
Yeah, you're so true. And to be honest, as you're speaking, I'm thinking, I think, yeah, I've definitely asked. I don't even think they knew why themselves, right? And they probably didn't want to expose that. So they're probably like, oh, I don't know, we'll just do what we're told. And I think it's maybe a lack of them caring. They're probably just there to get the salary, go home and do that. And that's fine. That's perfectly fine. But I think, again, it comes back to I can't do something if I don't know why. And depends on the size of the organization. You are a very small drop in a large pond. So for me, I couldn't see the direct impact of what I was doing, even though the role was important. Sometimes it's hard to see that when you are so far down the chain, or you're doing something that is adding to an overall sort of cog in the wheel, so to speak. So I can understand that people just maybe they don't ask, and so when you ask them, that sort of gets them on the back foot on defense a little bit. So I'd like to sort of switch gears now and maybe explain your thoughts on how companies need to change the way their business model operates. Now, we've sort of touched on this throughout the interview, but I'm really curious to know what this means and what this means for people who are listening.
Yeah, well, thanks for this one. I think that it means we really need to find new models of diagnosis of the organizational health, or uh, dynamics, or architecture, whatever you call it, and the drivers and motivation behind people who are involved in the organization. And from this level, understand whether it's aligned, whether it's why, with its purpose, where it's going. Okay, for instance, I don't know, companies like Nintendo, Nintendo exists from the end of 19th century, and the purpose of this organization was to entertain people. And they started with playing cards back in Japan, back in the time. And now they are doing all of this, fancy hardware devices and software on them, while they are still committed to entertaining people. They don't try to compete on computational power or performance of their devices with the competitors. But what they're trying to do, they're trying to engage people in a different ways, like this thing when you can play tennis with a stick, and this on the screen somebody will move. So all this interactivity is one of the examples where the company does exist for almost like 150 years. The tools and ways how you deliver that have changed and advanced, but you're still true to your why and your purpose. But and then you have the story of the founder, right? So the company was founded for a reason, for the reason why it will do something in the market. uh, it's important to make sure, whether it's C-suite or the founder, or the main people in leadership in the company, that this why is sort of constantly streaming to the entire organization. And then when we're living in this dynamic environment, how do you make sure it's happening? You need to measure it, right? So there is actually a lot of tools already in the market which are measuring engagement, involvement, and motivation of your personnel, of your human capital. And then that you can find some insights into whether people are in the right quadrant of giving their profile, whether they're in the right quadrant of the organization. Say, someone who is very driven by data and quantifiable things, probably would not be the best fit for sales or business development, because you really need to experiment and make some illogical, irrational things there, just to sort of understand your customer, or the person you're talking to. Or vice versa, if you put someone like me, for instance, in I don't know, in purely data analytics or computational thing, I would not probably succeed there. But then there is another layer. If the person even is in the right sort of spot or right domain of the organization, there might be some personal or business reasons why this person has lost the motivation after 4 or 5 years of working there. Maybe it's disconnect with why, or it hasn't been communicated. Maybe it's personal reason. Maybe the strategy of the company has taken the turn that was unexpected, and sort of hit the bias or resistance of that person. If you identify it before the final decision on breaking up with the company is made, you can actually steer that into the right direction, and actually boost the engagement. And there are tools out there in the market which can help you to measure that. But in order to solve that, it's just human interaction. It's just actually sitting down in that boardroom and discussing everything from basics up to the strategy. And as we know, like, it's a biblical topic by McKinsey. Strategy is not about how we get to the successful point. It's about understanding the hurdles and barriers on the way there, and understanding how you're going to deal with them. So in that case, if you deal with people while having some metrics and some measured kind of verified data on that, data is just an input. It will never help you to solve the challenge or problem, but it will give you the picture, and then you decide where you go from there. This is why all of these hybrid strategist professions are one of those which will be in huge demand in the future. For instance, if you take my previous career in legal, the most people who will be in the most demand are not those who have learned the civil code from A to B, those who understand the whole holistic picture and how to deal with it in terms of people and processes and interactions in the ecosystem. So pretty much measure and face and deal with your people and be honest with your why. And this is how you go from it. There is another part about that some of the founders or leadership teams, they are not honest with themselves about why, and they would answer your question why. We just want to gain more ROI, or we need to make a money making machine. But that's a different topic. We can elaborate into that if you want as well.
Okay, so just to press on new business models, would you say it sort of lends itself to COVID? And what I mean by that is people had to, or they were forced to change their operating models. Like, I even remember working historically and it was like no one's allowed to work from home. It's like now you'd be really hard pressed to find someone that is not in a position where they're going to work from home. Like, no one's going to do that. And yes, there's going to be this hybrid model. But I think I'm just curious to know we've sort of forced people's hands. And so because of that, would you say it's going to accelerate people's change to their business model moving forward because they've already sort of adopted this new age approach, perhaps? Like, am I on the right track here in that thinking, or correct me if I'm not?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't be on the wrong track in this type of discussions because honestly, we're all in this process at the moment. We may have points of view and sort of kind of philosophy around where we're going. But definitely the fact is already there that a hybrid approach to ways of working is not going anywhere, especially in technology-based companies. And I don't know, like any company which is trying to be future-proof now has this plus tech, whatever, biotech, insurtech, fintech. So with these ways of working, the fundamental element is trust, because if you have a remote team or someone working remotely, like myself, for instance, my company I'm working for at the moment is based out of Sydney, and I was the first person to start working out of Melbourne. And then the last 1.5 years proved that building that trust and constant communication, while we haven't really used any advanced tools to measure that trust or that performance, we have some other sort of OKRs and indicators, but this is important. But how do you build trust? Again, in a sort of kind of frameworked way, you make sure that the why and the purpose of your organization is aligned with your employee or your partner. And when I'm saying employee, I'm giving like a broad term, because there are people who are working through their companies and contracts, but it's not the shape of the transaction, it's the outcome, it's the joint journey. Whereas in the previous model, when everybody had to sit in the office from 9 to 5, you had this kind of control approach, and which sort of kills the innovation, kills the outside of the box thinking, which is incredibly important in all industries at the moment. And this model is, from my perspective, is fading away because it was built from factories and industrialization of the end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century, when everybody was sitting at the desk, and the same model was accepted for education, and from this and that to that time, and doing what they're told to. Now we've like in Web3, we're in a digital revolution. We're after COVID. We can't do that anymore. Unless we want to go backwards, like we started this podcast, and in some areas we started to do that. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm curious. So, okay, you mentioned, so the operative sort of phrase was the controlled approach. So, you're right. And as I've mentioned before, I remember historically, again, going back to the working from home model, I had a manager let everyone on my team work from home, and then I wasn't allowed to. For whatever reason, who knows? Maybe one day I'll approach this person and ask why. I don't think I did anything wrong. I'm not sure. But again, maybe there was some ulterior motive, or I'm not sure. The theory is that, do you think that companies feel this they feel a bit out of control? Because when people are working from home, yes, of course, they've got remote access and all of that. So you can keep sort of tabs on them, so to speak, but you still don't really know if they're going for a 45-minute coffee break versus a 5-minute, because you'd notice that, hey, Eugene's been gone for a long time, or Carissa's been gone for a long time. Now you don't really have that visibility. So would you say that lack of control and that out of control is starting to spiral perhaps for some companies because they don't know what all their employees are doing?
Well, I think first of all, definitely my personal advice: approach that person and have that conversation. Definitely will give you a lot of interesting insights. But I mean, the person that didn't allow you to work from home back then. But in terms of control, I think it definitely there are. Okay, let's be practical here. There are areas where you need to have that responsible kind of transparency. I wouldn't call it the control, and you need to have the means and ways to make sure that someone is doing the job, and it's sort of important. Like if you take government or sensitive areas of the society, you can't just allow someone to have coffee in whatever point of day they may like. But we need to shift the mindset in a way that even if in the areas where we require more of the visibility and control, if we push too hard, we're not going to have any control. If you're trying to be a control freak and over control things, you're going to have nothing, no control at all. So you need to really harmonize and balance that. And in industries like, in places like startups and technology companies, which are thinking on new deliverables, new solutions, uh, uh, you should look from the perspective of the outcomes, not from the perspective of the uh, process itself. So you need to establish the environment when people are motivated to do things. So if you can't motivate another person without creating an environment in which that person will motivate them, themselves. And so I think for most of the companies, and I'm saying like 80%, except for probably very sensitive government areas like and defense and all of that, where you need some sort of this military command approach. Otherwise, my personal view on that, the less control you have, the more your why is communicated, the more it's aligned, and you can measure that whether your people are engaged or not, and find out if they're not and why. But the more you have that alignment, you don't need to control anyone. They'll be inspired and motivated to deliver and to fulfill the company's perspective and purpose. I was at this conference still yesterday, and there was a lady who is specialized in having placing people in the right domains of the organization, making sure they're in their best position to be creative, to be productive. And she said, "I hate this world control. I would rather say we should not control people. We should inspire people." And I love that. It actually makes total sense to me. And she's very practical. She comes over to those tech companies and measures where their people are sort of sitting and what they're doing. And from there, she's given an advice on how to sort of harmonize that.
Yeah, so okay, one thing I'd really like to hear your thoughts on is you got a lot of people out there that are like, yeah, I'm going to inspire my employees. I'm not going to have the control. I'm going to be like the cool boss. So, is it genuine though? Because I mean, look, anyone can say what they want, they can have the right intention, but there's still, you can sort of tell with certain people that there's that ulterior motive there. Like perhaps every hour that they're messaging you on Microsoft Link to be like, how's the thing going? So it's like they're saying one thing, but they're doing another thing. So there is still that level of disingenuousness. Can you sort of explain a little bit more? Are you seeing this again? Am I really sort of off the mark here? But I mean, I've come across this myself, like all these people sort of just saving face a little bit because that's what they're told to do, but it's just not genuine.
I think in this particular case, at least what comes into my mind is that ideally in the organization larger than 15, 12 people, it's better to have not the sole and one decision maker. Because if you have one decision maker who may have a bad day or bad mood, or all of us, we have some strengths and weaknesses as human beings, and traits and features that are good, and some of that are still would probably require improvement. So you want to make sure that important decisions on interaction with employees, on interaction with partners and customers are not made by just one person. Of course, it might be a family business, but it's up to you if you want to go with that. It's like, building, it's like dating and marriage stuff, which is always personal. But business wise, my professional take on that, if there is still one decision making in the organization larger than even 10 people, that's not healthy. At some point of time, it will start to impact not even like the people, but if you look at the business life cycles of any company, you have like startup or development, pre-startup, startup, emergence, growth, expansion, maturity, decline. At every phase of this business life cycles, you need a certain level of governance and decision making architecture to make sure that this one person doesn't text someone like 28,000 times a day, and this kills this employer-employee relationship. Or like texting, after having a drink at a Friday night and having a great idea, texting someone at 1 a.m. Friday night, and it might be a good intention, but very bad execution.
Oh my gosh, that is frustrating. 100%. And this is real stuff. This happened. I mean, I speak to people, they're expressing me, these managers or whoever it is, that this still does happen. That's why I was curious to get your thoughts on it. Now, would you say historically people make decisions though based on biases? We've sort of touched on a little bit today, but is this still the case today?
Absolutely, Carissa. Myself and yourself probably are making some decisions based on biases. It's just, we want to improve. Like, if we're aware about that, we want to improve, but we're always, like, by design, human is a biased being. We have like this, like three or four segments of our brain, from reptilian to the kind of cognitive advanced part of it. So it will definitely impact the decision making. And back to my previous point, this is why we need several angles to this decision making process. And you have examples where 2 years ago, or maybe a little bit less, top management and strategy consulting of the world, McKinsey and Company, on their board couldn't make a decision on who was going to be the next kind of head of McKinsey Global. They even applied AI on top of their standard decision-making process, governed by all of the documents you can imagine there, and they couldn't make it. It was like a ridiculous anecdotal story. McKinsey can't make the decision on themselves, and they're like advising clients on decision-making, right? So it's going to
Wow,
be
that's
there.
overkill.
Yeah, it's going to be there, and it's fine, and definitely. Uh, Even in the examples when somebody texts you at night, like the founder of the company you're working for, the best way to sort of probably clear that out is to be human for both leader and employee, and have this honest conversation, and try to intend to build the decision making um, mechanism or framework in the company when all these biases are addressed. And actually, it's like with the data analytics. If you know what is your bias, for instance, I have a bias that I would not, I don't know, like I can't imagine which bias I have. You see, this is already a bias because it's really hard to self-analyze you. But having this sort of internal conversation or self-awareness exercise, okay, I may have this bias because, for instance, I may not potentially hire a Russian person at the moment, but if I talk to this person and I understand this is a I'm working with the Russians in my company. I'm just joking. So it's just that kind of this type of approach where you need to be self-aware as an organization, as a group of people, that there might be this or that bias, and and you address that and you talk about it. You don't have any technology which will address this in an ideal matter, in ideal manner that is actionable at the moment. Of course, you have all of these sort of statistical AI models or machine learning models, but they will give you some extent of probability, and the rest of the percentage of probability and the human behavior amplified. You're not going to resolve it purely by technology, maybe in, I don't know, 100 years, but not now. So you really need to keep that communication going, and be aware about your biases and the biases of your colleagues, your partners, and employees in place, and keep communication going.
Okay, so from your perspective, what are some of the strongest biases that you see? Now, I'm not talking about you specifically, but like just generally from like companies that you've noticed, perhaps. Is there any sort of ones that stand out quite substantially?
Well, there are a lot of them because I'm in basically business development and sales. I have rate of rejection of about whatever I'm suggesting and offering like around 80-90%, which is a normal thing, right? So, for instance, I would have a bias that okay, this sales guy is calling to sell me his company. I'm not gonna really listen. I'm gonna show that I'm listening, but I'm not actually involved. Or you may have social biases around who comes from where, what is the professional background, what is how does the person look like, how does the person sound like. Uh, Multiple biases, or in decision making in the organization, somebody may come up with a great idea, but for instance for technology solution, but this person hasn't got any sort of technology background, and this will not be taken into account. Or otherwise the technology guy offers a creative solution for sales, but then since this was the first time in the year that this guy has started talking because he was in the code, nobody would listen, right? So there is like a lot of literature on types of biases. I'm not a behavioral scientist, definitely. It's just my practical observations. I think you had a couple of great guests on that topic, and one of the professors from Sydney. They're doing a great job in that space, and I think this is the domain that should be definitely embedded in business decision making. And the tools I mentioned about measuring engagement of employees, they are like software tools, but they already embed that sort of wisdom in them. Yeah, so many biases, on whatever basis. It's just we have this reptilian part of the brain which makes sure we're secure and safe physically, and I think most of the biases come from that side, because it's not just because we're arrogant, it's because our sort of brain tries to secure us from potential threats. And since we're not, at least all of us are in war at the moment, we like create those problems sometimes in the places where they don't exist in the business landscape.
I guess it's just human nature, right? Like, and people say don't judge people. Like, we naturally judge people. Like, it just happens. Like, it's a subconscious thing rather than it is conscious. And then maybe it is conscious after a while. Like, who knows, right? But would you say in Australia there are stronger biases here than perhaps other parts of the world? And why is that?
Well, to be honest, from now I've traveled around Europe. I've been in the US, and mostly Europe and Asia, and Australia is my home now. But from my perspective as a Ukrainian guy, I would say that from my experience, again, it's the least biased place I've ever been to. It's been really, of course there are challenges and different people, but it's been really welcoming to me. And I wouldn't call it, even though I talk to people who were born here, or who are sort of who've been for a longer time than I've been here, and I hear different thoughts that there are certain types of social biases or business biases. But my experience hasn't been really bad. I would rather say it's great. I lived and studied in Switzerland. I moved. My projects were in Netherlands, Belgium, even Russia, and other places. And I've seen, at least in European part of the planet, I've seen much more multi-layered biased approach to people and decisions. So I would call Australia as a new world by all means. Of course, there are biases because there are 25 million people on board here. Of course, there are biases, but otherwise, it's really positive, and I wouldn't call it a challenging place. If you're open-minded, you can build your life here, and discuss those biases with people around you.
Yeah, that's interesting. No, I like that. I've never really spoken about this sort of topic on the show, so I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate you, Eugene, and your time today. So, thanks for taking the time out to come on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Carissa. I hope we didn't go too far and philosophical, but definitely in all technology space, we're seeing a lot of
those sort of challenges and matters. And if we address them, I think our technologies and our solutions will be just better, because we've advanced them so far that it's time for humans to catch up.
Thanks for tuning in. We hope that you found today's episode useful and you took away a few key points. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to get our latest episodes. If you'd like to find out how KBI can help grow your cyber business, then please head over to kbi.digital.
This podcast was brought to you by KBI.media, the voice of cyber.